Welcome everyone to this new great talk. We have the privilege today to have again with us Philippe Sands, that will share his reflections on the book Le Temps de la Paix, written by our dear Yves Beigbeder with the collaboration of Pascal Casby. It told us that the book was written by four hands. We could add that beyond the four hands, it was written with two minds and two hearts. I particularly like this kind of writing because it brings together the flow of the personal life of Yves and the flow of the events in which he participated. And the title of the great talk today is We Live in Times of War Crimes, What Progress After Nuremberg? The title is particularly timely. We all have in mind the invasion of Ukraine, but we had last week in Geneva the president of the UN General Assembly who reminded us that today there are more than 28 war events in the world. We are then looking forward to hear Philippe Sands, Yves, and Pascal to find out what we have learned since Nuremberg. By we, I mean the world, not only Europe. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Manuela so that she can walk us again on how we're going to proceed. Manuela, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. There is no really time fixed and set in stone, but I would like to give the floor first to Dr. Philippe Sands and then to Yves and Pascal for comments and reactions on his own reflections, inspired and based on Yves' book, Le Temps de la Paix, that is here in my hands. So, Dr. Sands, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Yeah, well, I mean, I've read the whole of Yves' book, and it's a work of tremendous inspiration for me. And I'm going to dwell mostly on the earlier part of his extraordinary life, because that's the bit which caused us to get to know each other, and which I find so inspiring, I have to say. I mean, I think we know generally that it is the early years of one's life that have such a decisive influence on the direction that we take. And I think, but Yves will correct me if I'm wrong, that must have been the case in relation to this remarkable individual whose life has been devoted to the well-being of international organizations in a range of different fields. I thought what I would do is say a little bit more about how I came across Yves and how he helped me understand those earliest days of international criminal law. The timing of our conversation is, I think, particularly appropriate. We just had a brief moment, Yves and I now, in conversation in relation to Ukraine and Russia. A year ago, I published an article in the Financial Times newspaper proposing the creation of a special criminal tribunal to deal with the crime of aggression perpetrated by Russia in relation to Ukraine. When I wrote the article, the newspaper invited me to reflect on any topic I wanted to on the subject of Ukraine and international law. And I thought about this for a day or two. This was just after the invasion had begun, and settled on a subject that was really inspired in a sense by what Yves has written about and what he observed as a very young man in 1945 and 46. I noticed that there was a gap in the architecture of international law, that the International Criminal Court had jurisdiction in relation to war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide, but that it did not have jurisdiction in relation to the crime of aggression, which, as Yves knows far better than anyone alive today, was the central focus of so much of what was argued at the Nuremberg Tribunal. And so I focused on that, and I proposed in an article published on the 27th of February 2022, so just 3 days after the invasion, the creation of a special criminal tribunal for the crime of aggression. I never thought, when one writes these kinds of things, that it would actually come to pass, that there would be interest but I was overwhelmed by the reaction, which was from former British prime ministers, from former heads of state and heads of government of various countries, from Mr. Dmytro Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, saying, yes, this is an important idea, we would like to run with it. I won't detain you for too long on what happened subsequently, but one thing led to another, as it often does in life. A number of Baltic countries, and then Poland, and then the Czech Republic came on board, and then the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and then the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, and then the Parliamentary Assembly, the Parliament of the European Union. And then the Dutch government said that they would be willing to create an interim mechanism in The Hague. And then France broke the deadlock in November and said, yes, we can support such an idea. And that then caused Germany and Britain and the United States to say, yes, we can support such an idea. Of course, there remains much to be done in terms of the nature and the definition of such a tribunal. But it is now pretty clear to me that there will be a special criminal tribunal on the crime of aggression in Ukraine. Its form and its powers and its particular direction remains to be determined by government. The story is an important one for me because it goes back, in a sense, to what I wrote about in East-West Street, Retour à Lemberg, and the work of some remarkable individuals. I'm thinking of Hersch Lauterpacht and Raphael Lemkin in coming up with the ideas that became the crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity. But I think, to be honest, the reason that I wrote that opinion piece was in very large part inspired by those parts of Yves' own book and his own experience. So let me say a little bit more about that. It was now, 9-10 years ago that I first came across Yves Beigbeder. I was doing research on the Nuremberg trial. I was interested in how the subjects of crimes against humanity and genocide had entered the Nuremberg Statute, ideas created by Raphael Lemkin and Hersch Lauterpacht. And I was equally interested in how those two crimes were argued before the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg. I read the entire transcript of the Nuremberg proceedings, which I can tell you was a very lengthy exercise, but sort of fascinating. And over time, I came to settle on one of the defendants as being of particular interest. I tell his story in East-West Street. His name is Hans Frank, and he was the lawyer of Adolf Hitler between 1928 and 1933, and then Justice Minister of Bavaria, and then from 1939 in October, the Governor General of the Government General, Nazi-occupied Poland. And the reason that I focused on him was because in August 1942, Hans Frank traveled to Lviv, Lemberg, Lvov, and gave a major speech in what is today the aula of the university in the city of Lviv, announcing the implementation of the final solution. And in the days and weeks and months that followed, his actions led to the extermination of the entire families of Raphael Lemkin, Hersch Lauterpacht, and my own grandfather, Leon Buchholz, the only survivor of that family. And so Hans Frank became a figure of interest. Now, as I was doing the research, someone said to me, have you been in touch with Yves Beigbeder? And I vaguely knew the name, I must confess, dear Yves. I'd come across some of your books, which you described now in this latest book that you had written on various subjects relating to the times you'd spent in Geneva working for the UN and various international organizations. And if you recall, Yves, I tracked you down and eventually I found you. And I found you because I was interested in talking to someone who had actually been at Nuremberg. For me, it was sort of a miracle to imagine that you could be in contact with someone who was present at that most extraordinary historical moment. And you were very generous with your time, dear Yves. We had an email exchange and then we spoke. And I will never in my whole life forget that first conversation that we had, or indeed the subsequent conversations that we'd had. You will correct me, but if I recall, and I'm paraphrasing, you described your situation in the summer of 1945 as a young man who'd very recently graduated from the university in Paris, law school, legal studies, and you were contacted by your uncle, who had been identified, a wonderful criminal lawyer, Henri Denis de Vabre, to be the French principal judge at Nuremberg trial. And I think, if I'm correct, he had suggested to you that you might wish to join him as an assistant. And if, again, I'm correct, as I recall you telling me, initially you declined. You didn't have much interest in going off to this place called Nuremberg. You'd rather stay in Paris or in France and get on with your new young career, perhaps as a lawyer. But I think it was your aunt who eventually prevailed upon you. And I think one of the arguments that she made to you was that the enticement of going to Nuremberg was perhaps not only, or not so much, the possibility of witnessing or even participating in the most famous trial in human history. It was the prospect of obtaining access to oranges and chocolate, which is what the Americans had on offer in Nuremberg. And I loved the way you told me that, because it exactly captured the totality of your book, the mixing of the very personal, the very real daily life with these matters of huge significance and importance. But anyway, happily for me and happily for all of us, you did go off to Nuremberg and you did serve as your uncle's assistant for a few months. But most significantly for me, you were there in Nuremberg on the day that Hans Frank first gave testimony. Now, I can't thank you enough or express enough amazement that I could speak to someone who was in the courtroom and watched Hans Frank testifying before the International Military Tribunal. This possibility touches me so much. You were a witness, you were a participant in history. It's an extraordinary thing to have you with us today. And you described to me the rumors that had reached you and others that perhaps Hans Frank was going to make some sort of a confession or acceptance of things that he had done. And you described to me the excitement that this had not happened before with any of the other defendants, and this could be an absolutely historical moment. And you also told me about what then happened, how you heard Hans Frank give his testimony and how he accepted, well, from my reading of the transcript, a collective responsibility as a member of the group for the crimes that had been perpetrated in the name of Germany. But you weren't merely an observer or a participant assisting, because amazingly, you wrote up in a small Protestant newspaper a contemporaneous account of what you had seen. And this is one of your marvels, Yves. It is not just that you watch, that you observe, that you listen, but that you write. And because you write, others are able to benefit from what it is that you have seen and heard and listened to. And you wrote contemporaneously, and I cherish your article written in 1946, so soon after hearing Hans Frank in the witness box, because that account has the power of contemporaneity. It's not the account of a historian who goes over the documents and interprets and seeks to understand what was said. You were there. You heard what Frank said, You saw him in the flesh, and you then shared that with us. And your account of that in the newspaper contemporaneously, and your account of that now in your new book is so very precious, because it has that sense of authenticity and earthy connection with the direct human experience. And I think the reading of you is vital because of the voice with which you write, and of course the voice with which you speak, but we're here concerned with your new book. You are a human being of great humanity. You describe what you have lived through and your ideas with precision, but also with warmth and balance and fairness. And that gives, I think, your reflections a particular power. You are surely a man of emotions and a man of passions, but you're also a man of reason and a person who is able to describe what he has seen in a manner that conveys to the reader the reality and the power of what it is you have experienced. And so I think we are all rather blessed by the fact that you have somehow, amazingly, at this later stage of your life, found the strength and the will and the tenacity and the courage and the dignity to put the totality of your life onto the pages of a book to allow it to be taken forward. I am quite sure that your writings will be the subject of great reference in the years to come, because they record not only what you thought, but what you have lived through and what you have experienced. And right now, that is extremely significant, because right now, as you know better than anyone, dear Yves, Europe is once again thrown into a turmoil by a use of military force, which we have not seen for more than 75 years, in terms of its scale, in terms of its brutality, and in terms of its horror. And this experience that we are going through now reminds us of the vital importance of never forgetting our history. And history includes personal history, and that includes your personal experience, which you shared with us. So to conclude, the accounts of which you write, and I've just settled on one experience in a long and extraordinarily productive and decent and significant life. Your experiences help us to understand the essentials of our value system and what we should be caring about, what motivated us, the values that connected us in 1945 and the values which hopefully still connect us today. Looking on the bright side in relation to these terrible events in relation to Russia and Ukraine, one of the things they have done is forced us to recognize that we must never take for granted the values that inspired that 1945 moment and what you lived through. And your writings help us to do that. They help us not to forget. They help us not to take for granted that which your generation has given us. And these difficult moments today help us to, I think, recognize the importance of that moment. And so, to wrap up, your book is, for me, of huge significance. It's a personal memoir of the most potent political developments over the last 75 years. And I express to you, dear Yves, my deep gratitude that you have taken the time and the trouble, I know not always in the easiest of circumstances, to put pen to paper, or to at least have others work with you in putting pen to paper. And I thank here Pascal, extraordinary diligence and contribution to your exercise. It's been a real privilege to work with you over these 10 years. You have inspired me hugely. You are a person of impeccable independence and integrity. And I raise, well, it's not quite a glass, but it's a paper cup in honor of your book, in honor of your ideas, in honor of your integrity. And thank you deeply for giving us this magnificent text. Thank you so much, dear Yves.
Thank you very much, Philip. I can only say that I'm very grateful to GREYTALK to have organized this meeting, to you for being there in spite of all your busy life, and to Pascal for all her hard work in doing the book. What you said, it is I just correct one thing. It's not my uncle who called me to Nuremberg, it's my aunt, Tante May. It's the same thing. She said, your uncle wants you to come to Nuremberg. And I say stupidly, I can't. I've got a Boy Scout camp and I cannot come. So they fixed that up. And it was a really extraordinary experience to be there at the time. One of the major experiences of my life, which was very varied and well, what can I say? After 1946, when I was there, I went to the United States with in books, and spent there 2 years, and I forgot about Nuremberg. Nuremberg came back a few years ago at the time of the 50th anniversary of the trial, and I remember seeing you and John, I forget his last name, John Barrett, in Nuremberg itself, in the courtroom where the trial was held. And that reminded me suddenly, that's very important. And later on, I got all sorts of calls to testify to newspapers or to BBC or to others about my experience had been. So it would put me back into the position. But I find that my life was made up of hazards. The first biggest hazard was Nuremberg, and then later on working for international organizations, thanks to my American diploma. And that is, and then when I started studying for a doctorate in law, in public law, from Geneva to the University of Grenoble, I wrote a thesis on syndicalism, trade unionism in international organizations, which eventually was published at my expense. And it started me off on a career of writing, which I had thought about before. So I wrote in French or in English on such subjects I knew about: international organizations, the World Health Organization, HCR, UNICEF, etc., and many articles also. But doing this thesis gave me a good chance to sort of get out of my bureaucratic life and do something, because of course when you write, you have to research, you have to find out what's going on. And that helped me a lot. A friend of mine told me, oh, Yves Beigbeder, he publishes one book a year, which was true. And I was lucky enough to find publishers in English, either in Germany or Netherlands or in the US. But that gave it a tremendous interest to my life at the time. I don't want to go more unless you have specific questions. But thank you very much, Philippe. I have just read your preface of the book, which is very elogious, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. And thank you to Manuela and Alexandro and Pascal. I hope she's around. But without her, the book would not be here.
I would like to take the opportunity just to take advantage of this parenthesis, if I may. There is a sentence at the end of your book in the quotation of an interview that somebody did to you in 1946. And the last question by the interviewer concerns your conviction that what is happening at that time, 1946, at the tribunal will be very important for the history and for the development of international criminal law. And your reply at that time is that, yes, I'm absolutely convinced of the value of this trial, particularly because I hope, I am paraphrasing again, I hope that it will oblige the leaders of the future to reflect before committing crimes. And anyway, we will talk about that in 30 years from now, you say. So we are in 1946, 30 years would have been 1970 something. But now we are in 2023. Could you extrapolate from that hope that leaders will reflect regarding the lessons of the Tribunal of Nuremberg and the principles of international criminal law? And do you think that they're reflecting today? And what sort of reflections can you envisage? And I would like to address this question to all of you, to Yves, to Philippe, and to Pascal. I'm pretty sure that you have three different but convergent perspectives.
I remember what I wrote. It was not published, but I wrote it as I felt about it. But I think it's eternal recommencement. You have to go on and on and on about trying to chase and punish those who commit all those horrible crimes, or encourage others to do so, as Mr. Putin obviously gave free rein to his army and to Wagner to do what they want. They can rape, they can kill, and nothing will happen. Well, I hope we catch them, or we catch some of them, and that will be important. I mean, there have been, as you know, important temporary tribunals for Rwanda, for Sierra Leone, for ex-Yugoslavia, which are important, and they punished a number of delinquents, international delinquents. But these were temporary tribunals, and nothing came much until the International Criminal Court was created at the end of but we can always hope that some courageous and people like Philippe will be able to achieve something. If he convinced France to go along, I think it's been marvelous, because I was just reading recently that France, Great Britain and Germany were not in favor of such a tribunal. So I think this is terrible. And also, I've been very deeply disappointed by my chief of the government, Mr. Macron, who seemed to be flirting with Putin by telephoning him all the time as if he could convince him to become a good boy, but he won't. This is an illusion, and it's certainly not a proper way to do it. So far.
Dr. Sands, would you like to elaborate on this? Are they thinking, the leaders of today, about what happened in Nuremberg?
Yeah, I would be very happy to elaborate, but I wonder whether I can just first ask Yves a question, whether he could help us. Having been through that experience in 1945 and 1946, and given everything you have learned subsequently, what advice would you give me and others as we seek once again to hold to account individuals purporting to act on behalf of a country that commit crimes against peace or a crime of aggression? In other words, what lessons did you learn from your experience at Nuremberg that you think we should take into account?
Well, it was somewhat easier in Nuremberg because all the criminals were in jail. While at the moment, none of them is. And so we have to start from scratch. But there are a number of bodies who make researchers and records of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And these will be essential for carrying on some sort of justice. So all these should be kept into account and retained, and they are. I think there are a number of bodies, either at the European level or Ukrainian level, or others who keep stock. And this is the essential first step. Keep records, keep testimonies, and eventually it will be possible to start at least indicting some of them. And that would be a major step if those criminals are indicted and judged. It's not going to be easy. It's a big job, but I know Philippe and others are doing the work by you have to keep on harping on politicians so that they don't forget their responsibility.
Dr. Sands, you promised to elaborate.
Yes, I'm very, very happy to elaborate. Well, what I can say is that as we proceeded with a little informal group working with the Ukrainian government and then the governments of various Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and then Poland, and then the Czech Republic and Bulgaria, Georgia, and various other countries, slowly a coalition came together. But we were acutely conscious that until one of the bigger countries came on board, it would be quite difficult to get the idea of a special criminal tribunal for the crime of aggression off the ground. Indeed, the Dutch government made it clear that they would find it difficult to put into effect their offer to create a special criminal tribunal, or at least an interim mechanism, without the support of one of the big four. Who are the big four? The big four they identified in no particular order was France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and the United States. And by the summer of 2022, the Dutch were ready to, if you like, action some development. But we really were waiting to see which of the four larger countries, if any, might crack. I must say I was a bit skeptical about whether it could be France, because France has had a long-standing concern about the crime of aggression, dating back actually all the way to 1945. And the issue for these countries, not Germany perhaps, but the other three, was this. They were obviously focused on the question, if we set up a special criminal tribunal today on the crime of aggression in relation to Russia, why can't we do it tomorrow in relation to us? And of course, they're right. There has never been a special criminal tribunal created in relation to a permanent member of the Security Council. And international law loves a precedent. And once you've done it once, of course, you can do it again. And in this regard, there is a ginormous, huge elephant in the room on this subject, and that is Iraq. As I think many of you know, for me, Iraq was a manifestly illegal war. It gave rise in the views of many, including a former Deputy Foreign Office legal advisor, Elizabeth Wilmshurst, to the crime of aggression. And that raises a question of double standards. If countries like Britain and the United States, which prosecuted the war, the aggression in relation to Iraq, but got away with it, so to speak, are now willing to create some tribunal in relation to Russia, it is normal that people will say hypocrisy, double standard. And that is regrettably a situation that we face. And so there is a concern with these countries, but it seems that the sort of crack in the firmament came with France, whose foreign minister visited Kiev. In the course of that visit, I think in November, announced that France could be open to the idea. And that, I remember reading that, and I remember thinking, that's interesting. I mean, I know Catherine Colonna well enough to know she was the ambassador in London for France. I came to know her a little bit during that period, that she's a very careful and a very diligent person. And I thought to myself, would she say such a thing unless she had sign off from a higher court? I doubt it. She's an extremely professional and cautious individual. And indeed, that instinct was proved right, that very soon France announced, and the European Commission followed, that it would support the creation of some sort of a mechanism to investigate and, as appropriate, prosecute the crime of aggression. And once France came on board, we knew that Germany would follow. Why? Because Germany did not want to contradict France. And once Germany and France were on board, the question would become, what would the Anglo-Saxons do? What would Britain do? What would the United States do? Britain moved first, and I must say some of us have been working very hard to persuade the British. I express my particular appreciation to Gordon Brown and John Major, who have, I think, done a lot of behind-the-scenes work in making this happen. And once the UK was on board, then the United States came on board. Now, when I say on board, I do want to be very careful. I'm not going further than saying they are open to the idea of a special criminal tribunal of some sort, but they are acutely conscious of the dangers of setting a precedent for them. And anything they do will, of course, set a precedent. But I think the fact is we're now into the realms of where there's a political will, there's a way. And once the sort of emergent outlines of what kind of special criminal tribunal, what's the relationship between the international and Ukrainian legal systems, for example, once we've got a better view on that, the lawyers will be able to fashion some legal text. So the crucial issue is political will. Once you've got political will, you should be able to fashion a legal text. And my prediction is that in the coming months, we will have a special criminal tribunal on the crime of aggression. And that is a very good and significant thing, inspired in large part by the ideas and the writings of Yves and many of his colleagues.
Well, once you get some agreement in principle, the mechanisms are all there. you could go back to the London conference prior to Nuremberg, where the four countries, lawyers, got together and started writing a charter. So all this is well-known territory on how to get on to write and agree on the terms, on the sanctions, and the procedure, and the Nuremberg experience has been used time and time again in those matters. So we can hope that with energy and conviction, things will change. But it is very, very difficult. We know about Lebanon, how impossible the tribunal has been to exert any influence on Syria, etc. So it's no easy task, but it's a good start, and it should be followed up. And I'm delighted if France is changing a bit its stand. That's good news, because they've always resisted any interference with their, particularly their military stuff and political, of course. So it's if Macron can organize some sort of change of position, we kind of say good.
I would like to take advantage of the presence of Miss Pascale Casby with us. So the other hand that completes the four hands of Yves in writing this book. But I would like to ask her a question from the point of view of her profession. She's a psychologist, if I'm not mistaken. And so we just heard that it takes political will in the first place, and then a technical legal work to achieve this objective of having a special tribunal. But from the psychological point of view, what does it take for a leader to accept the idea of a tribunal of that sort in the context that we are talking about, the current context, from the point of view of both Russia and Ukraine, and of course the US, Europe, and the NATO states? Is there a psychological dimension that has to be taken into account?
Oui, donc merci beaucoup pour votre question, Manuela. C'est pour tout psychologue extrêmement difficile, évidemment, de se positionner vis-à-vis, je dirais, du politique ou vis-à-vis du juridique. Comme je vous l'ai exprimé, les psychologues sont toujours un peu les canards boiteux de l'histoire, alors que nous alertons toujours sur les faits suivants, à savoir qu'un génocide ou un massacre, voire même une guerre, n'arrive jamais par hasard. Il y a des prémices, sociaux, il y a des prémices politiques, et ces derniers sont évidemment à prendre en compte. Par exemple, si on regarde ce qui s'est passé en Allemagne avec la montée du nazisme, l'arrivée de Hitler au pouvoir en 1933, et puis ensuite la mise en route de l'exclusion des Juifs de l'Allemagne, eh bien tout cela était prévisible. Il y avait des signaux, il y avait des paroles, il y avait des habitus qui étaient pris, et on retrouve exactement les mêmes processus, par exemple, avec ce qui s'est passé au Rwanda avec le massacre des Tutsis par les Hutus. Et il y a un psychologue que moi j'affectionne particulièrement, il est français et il est également historien. Et il a écrit un ouvrage que je recommande qui s'appelle « Purifier et détruire » et où il reprend évidemment toutes les modalités que je viens de décrire. Il reprend ces mêmes modalités aussi que l'on a vues pour la Yougoslavie, avec le massacre des Bosniaques par les Serbes. Donc, je crois qu'il est extrêmement important d'écouter, pas moi, j'ai une toute petite voix dans tout ça, mais des collectifs qui se penchent sur ces problématiques-là, des collectifs composés de sociologues et de psychosociologues et qui alertent les politiques quand il y a des dérapages verbaux, des dérapages politiques, parce qu'on sait que lorsque la loi aussi n'est plus là, ou lorsque un peuple décide de voter pour les extrêmes, on sait bien que cela peut conduire toujours au pire. Voilà ce que je souhaitais dire. Il va de soi qu'à titre personnel, j'attends beaucoup des tribunaux, d'un tribunal pénal international, tel qui pourrait se dessiner, par exemple, avec ce qui se passe en Ukraine, mais avec M. Poutine. Mais il y a quand même une question que je me pose et qui est la suivante. Est-ce que cela ne risque pas de créer aussi une autre problématique qui est celle de la conduite des États-Unis aussi. Et on voit bien, on entend bien que les États-Unis également n'ont pas toujours eu un comportement tout à fait ad hoc, si j'ose dire. Donc, j'ai une petite crainte à ce propos-là. L'autre observation, et j'en parlais avec Yves, que je salue au passage, c'est que est-ce que nos institutions onusiennes, notamment celles qui concernent le Conseil de sécurité, n'est pas un peu à revoir? Je ne dis pas que c'est obsolète, mais on voit bien que ce Conseil de sécurité qui a été créé au XXe siècle, est-ce qu'il ne mériterait pas d'être revu pour notre XXIe siècle qui ne s'annonce pas joyeux, hein. Pour une fois, je ne suis pas très optimiste avec le futur. Voilà ce que je souhaitais vous dire. J'en profite aussi pour parler du livre de Yves, parce que nous avons travaillé, mine de rien, quasiment 7 ou 8 ans pour faire ce livre, pour plusieurs raisons. La première, c'est que Yves, il a dû se faire tirer les oreilles par moi pour accepter qu'on puisse écrire sa biographie. Et ensuite, quand il a accepté de le faire, on a travaillé d'arrache-pied. Et puis, il y a eu la maladie. Et enfin, lorsqu'il a retrouvé la vie, nous nous sommes remis au travail tous les deux. Il nous restait 3 chapitres à terminer. Et moi, ce qui m'a intéressée dans la rédaction de cet ouvrage, c'était de voir comment Yves avait été impacté par son expérience à Nuremberg. Et c'est ce que j'ai souhaité faire ressortir dans chacun des chapitres, c'est qu'au fur et à mesure du temps qui passe, d'une manière ou d'une autre, Nuremberg se rappelle à lui et va donc l'obliger et le forcer et le conduire plutôt que le forcer à se pencher de manière plus comment dirais-je, plus ad hoc sur cette expérience qu'il avait vécue et qui a été fondatrice pour lui. Comme elle a été fondatrice d'ailleurs pour d'autres personnes qui ont vécu ce moment historique exceptionnel et qui étaient jeunes comme Yves. Je pense notamment à Benjamin Ferenc, dont vous avez certainement lu les mémoires, et qui lui aussi a été marqué. Alors, à double titre, non seulement Benjamin Ferenc a été à Nuremberg, il a conduit les procès contre les Einsatzgruppen, les groupes d'intervention qui précédaient la Wehrmacht et qui ont fait tous les massacres que l'on connaît, notamment en Ukraine et en Russie, et en Pologne, bien sûr, j'oubliais la Pologne. Et Benjamin Ferenc a fait le débarquement et il a été confronté au camp de concentration qu'il a découvert en même temps que les troupes américaines. Et cet homme est absolument extraordinaire, il est encore vivant et il a écrit avec Yves un article que je recommande beaucoup concernant l'Ukraine et ce qu'il s'agirait véritablement de faire à l'égard du dirigeant actuel russe. Voilà ce que je souhaitais dire.
Dr. Sands, avant que vous deviez nous quitter, before you have to leave, again, also, I'm always thinking about this human dimension. And you mentioned at the beginning that the book, Yves' book, is also a mirror of the human dimension and emotions that go beyond the cold technicalities of the legal process that leads to a tribunal. I think I'm pretty sure that you have also your own views on that human dimension that has to be taken into account.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when I was a student, the way we were taught international law was that international law was what states did and what states agreed. But international law, I think, as I've lived it, and as Yves has described it in his book, is different. The reality of international law is that it is a system of rules that is elaborated, established, responsive to individual initiative. I mean, I focus, for example, on the work that I've done on the origins of crimes against humanity and genocide. These concepts, like the crime of aggression, like the work that led to the establishment of the International Military Tribunal that gave Yves Beigbeder his start in life, were not the product of committees instructed to act at the behest of some government minister in a darkened corridor. They were the consequence of ideas generated by individuals. Those ideas then took off, or they didn't take off. If they did take off, they became a source of discussion, of conversation, of elaboration, and eventually they would have to be adopted by states if they were to go further. This was the experience of Lauterpacht and Lemkin. And in a sense, it could be said this is my own experience, and it's Yves' experience in so many of his initiatives. You come up with an idea in your head, you put pen to paper, you write, you distribute, you disseminate, the ideas are read and taken up, and somehow they reach someone who may be a decision maker, and they then possibly take off. But the crucial point that I always try to share with my students is that they are ideas that invariably begin with one or several individuals acting not in a governmental capacity, but in an individual capacity. Ideas, intellectual ideas, political ideas, legal ideas. And that is how the world actually operates. And Yves is a sort of living inspiration of that. And what I loved about his book is precisely it places his own role not in a narcissistic way, not in an egotistical way, but simply in a descriptive way, the different things that have come across his desk, the different ideas that he has generated, the different conversations that he has had, the different opportunities and challenges that he has faced. It's that essential human element that comes across from Yves' writing and Yves' activities. And that's what I try to impress upon my students. Things happen not because of ideas generated by states and governments, but because of ideas generated by individual human beings at a particular moment in time. And that's why I welcome a book like Yves', which is so intimate and so personal.
I don't know if there are other comments or other questions from our participants. Adiba, maybe you would like to say something from your own personal, again, individual experience and initiative?
Thank you so much. Well, hearing all of this, it's I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult, but at the same time, it gives me some hopes, you know. So surviving from the Yazidi genocide and, you know, coming to Geneva, I started to study law, and, you know, without like school backgrounds, because I have hopes that one day we could find justice, we could seek justice, and I know it will take lots of generations. I you know, maybe 3-4 generations until maybe we you know, we create something. But I have hopes, and you give me so much hopes to do hard work and to continue my way until one day we succeed. So thank you so much.
Adiba,
and yeah, yes, please. And what advice will you give to me as a survivor from the genocide, want to reach somewhere, want to arrive somewhere? It is very difficult psychologically for me, because it is a lot, you know, and we are a small minority comparing to big states, you know, and we are somehow abandoned, you know. So we don't have many hands to come and help us and to get us out of there. So we as individual, as you've said, we have to, each one of us, I've been always telling, you know, my friends in the Yazidi community, you write and you know, document everything, you know, get every testimony from the survivors, so one day we could do something. But it is very hard, you know. So what advice would you give me in such a situation?
Adiba, before we get to advice, tell me a little bit more about yourself. Where are you studying law?
So actually, you know, I was in Sinjar when the genocide happened. So I haven't been to school because of the war. I was having lots of problems. But anyway, the genocide happened. I was one of the last person who survived from the village. I saved my family, my siblings, and my parents. We migrated in Turkey, and then from Turkey, I put my siblings in a boat. I sent all my family to Germany, and I went back to Iraq to document the crimes. I was only 20 years old. So I had to work with military, with survivors, with child soldiers until 2017. So I was documenting there. And then I moved to Geneva because I wasn't able to continue my work as a woman, as a journalist and everything. So I started to study at the University of Geneva. I did some work at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. I've been advocating about the Yazidi genocide. And then I finally found the opportunity at the University of Geneva to start with international relations and law. So I wasn't speaking French, so I had to take the opportunity with international relations to learn what is happening between the state spheres and then Swiss law, but also to learn French. And now I am, you know, taking, you know, small steps towards international law at the University of Geneva.
And you're living in Geneva?
I live in Geneva, and I work with, right now I work with IIIM at the UN, that they are working on crimes that were committed in Syria. So
I'll be in Geneva on the 29th of March, so in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks.
Okay.
I'm giving a talk. If you can send me an email, I'd really be pleased to invite you to that talk, and maybe we can find a moment to talk.
Great pleasure.
Should I is there a chat? Is there a chat function? Can I send you my my email?
It's working. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sending you my email. Oh no, access. Oh, okay. Yes, I'm sending you my email. So you will have my email, and you can send me a note, and I'll tell you everything that's going on. And let's find a moment to talk.
Wonderful.
When I've just sent that to you.
Great, I got it.
I have had some contact, as you might know, with the Yazidi community, because I worked very closely with Jan Kizilhan.
Yes, the psychologist, yeah.
Yeah, and so I've had some involvement in this issues, and I'm very committed to supporting, and I'd love to find a way to help you become a lawyer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
There you are, Yves. That's what you've inspired, you see, with your writings, with this book, with this event, this sort of way in which individual connections are made.
Unexpected.
That's wonderful.
That's good. I also thought about, sometimes I'm asked to give speeches in schools. It's in small schools, and I find this extremely useful, because what children learn in school is disjointed with reality. They don't know about World War II. They don't know about what happened about the Shoah. And there's a lot that can be done by talking to them as a guest speaker.
Alejandro, over to you, I think.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sands. Thank you very much for your reflections, and I am sure we all appreciated not only the depth, but also the warmth of your reflections. I hope that you will have the time to see this recording. Your face changes, your eyes glow when you talk to Yves. There's a complete attitude that is there. Thank you very much for reminding us the power of words, for reminding us the power of memory and the power of action. And also, thank you very much indeed, because actually, through your words, you converted this great talk into a celebration of Yves' life, ideas, work, passion, independence, integrity, reason, convictions, and legacy. Thank you very much for that. It's really very well deserved. And thank you very much, Yves, for spending this time of your life with us and being so generous with us in all the events. I wonder if Yves' life is not only something that politicians and experts and lawyers should know. I think that the general public should know a little bit more of Yves' life. I can see really very much Tom Hanks playing the role of Yves. And I wonder if his life will inspire sometime a Netflix session or a book on his life. With your influence, Dr. Sands, and everybody reads you, if you could share this information with someone who would be interested, I'm sure that the general public will be inspired just as Aviva. Well, with this, thank you very much for your time. We know you are busy. You have another appointment, Dr. Sands. Thank you very much to all the participants, and looking forward to seeing you in the next Great Talk. Thank you very much. Take care, Yves.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.